What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and back with the first video showing off gameplay in Chimeratech format. I'm really excited to explore this format a bit more. I think it's really fun now that Stein is gone. Hopefully a lot of other decks can sort of rise up and compete in the format. But of course, if you've seen the name, you know that Chimeratech Overdragon is in the format, and if you see that there's a Future Fusion here, there's some Overload Fusions here, you know that there's another OTK in the format, and that is sort of this Chimeratech OTK. Basically, the idea of this deck, that Chimeratech is a fusion monster that's made with Cyber-Dragon and one or more machine monsters. And when it's fusion summoned, you send all cards you control to the graveyard, but that doesn't really matter most of the time. And it says the original attack and defense of this card each become equal to the number of fusion materials used for the fusion summon times 800. This card can attack your opponent's monsters a number of times each battle phase, up to the number of fusion materials used for its fusion summon. So the idea is that you activate Future Fusion. Future Fusion can reveal the Chimeratech Overdragon, and it has its original effect where you can send the fusion materials immediately to graveyard, and you basically just send your entire deck of machine monsters in addition to the Cyber Dragons. And then you activate an Overload Fusion, banish everything, get out a huge Chimeratech Overdragon that just kills your opponent on the spot. Now there's some other things you can do as well. For instance, Dimension Fusion is here too. So after you've gone for the Overload Fusion, you can fire Dimension Fusion, bring back a ton of monsters, things like Jinzo to shut off traps, things like Blowback Dragons to take apart the board a little bit, and even things like Spell Canceller if you're worried about things like Scapegoat or Book of Moon or things like that. So I think this deck is very, very scary. If you want to go for it or play against it, it is very, very tricky to play around, because if it does open the combo of Future Fusion plus Overload and you don't have a way to deal with that, then you're in for a pretty tough time. Now, that being said, the deck does have some flaws, which we'll hopefully get into later. But first, let's go through the card by card for this. Now, this list here is the list that actually won SJC Orlando, which this format is based around. It's based around SJC Orlando in January 2007, and this was created by Paul Lin here. I did fill out the extra deck a little bit more. They did have Chimeratech Overdragon, Cyber End Dragon, Cyber Twin Dragon, and Gatling Dragon here. I just added in some Super Vehicoid Jumbo Drills as sort of like a thematic fusion monster to finish off this deck. But given that Cyber-Stein is banned now, given that meta is limited and we're not playing it, we don't really have a good option to go into things like this. The important things here are Gatling, Twin, and Chimeratech Overdragon, because these are all things that you could reasonably go into. You either go into them off of Future Fusion, like maybe you activate Future Fusion, sending just a couple of Cyber Dragons to try and go into a Cyber End or Chimeratech, or not. Oh, if you're going for Chimeratech Overdragon, you probably are winning the game, but you can go into a just Cyber End or Cyber Twin as a bit of a less all-in move. You could also just go for Gatling Dragon, and Gatling Dragon can actually be summoned off of Overload Fusion because it is a Dark Machine monster. So if you sent a Blowback or a Barrel and you activate the Overload Fusion for Gatling, Gatling's a pretty good monster as well. So let's go through the card by card here real quick. Now, the reason why I chose to start with this list as opposed to building my own is because this list is very interesting. It's doing a lot of very interesting stuff that I probably would not go for in my own version of this deck, and I will be making my own version of the deck and showing that off on the channel later. But because it's doing things that I would not do, I figured, now is the time to show it off, and see if the innovations that this deck is doing are things that I want to incorporate into my own Machine OTK decks in the future. So, to start off, we've got the Cyber Dragon, 3 of these. You pair these with Future Fusion, you pair these with Overload Fusion. You need them in the deck for the Chimeratech Overdragon, and they're just good monsters in general. Special summon them out, 2100 attack, pretty good. Playing a lot of tribute monsters in the deck, so you can then tribute them for something else. You got the Blowbacks and a Barrel Dragon here as well for the Gatling push, if you want to go for that. A Blowback is just a good monster on its own as well. It can pop your opponent's stuff, potentially, and that's very good. Barrel can pop monsters, but Blowback is generally a little bit better. A Blowback you could also potentially summon out over the course of a game, whereas Barrel, you're probably just bringing out off of things like Dimension Fusion if you bring it out at all. We've also got a Jinzo here to bring out off of Dimension Fusion and shut down our opponent's traps for the OTK push. Same with Spell Canceller here. I'm a bit more iffy on Spell Canceller because I do think that it can be kind of awkward. You have a lot of powerful spells that you want to activate, and so if you go into a Spell Canceller before you've activated them, you can be in a bit of a tricky spot, but that's more about what you're doing and not about what your opponent's doing, so you can control that a little bit. I just find this card a little bit weak overall in the format. We've also got a Drillroid here to deal with our opponent's defense position monsters, which is pretty good. So we've got a general utility set of machine monster, which is very nice for after we go for an overload fusion plus dimension fusion there. But we've also got some ancient gear monsters. You may be looking at these and wondering why they're here. And the main reason they're there is for ancient gear drill. So ancient gear drill is a spell card that says if you control an ancient gear monster, discard one card, set one spell card directly from your deck. This turn, that spell card cannot be activated. So what you can do is you can pitch a card from hand and get something like a future fusion or an overload fusion directly onto the field, which is pretty good. And then if you trinate that back, you can then activate that turn, I believe. So that's sort of like an interesting combo there. You go Ancient Gear Drill, pitch a card, get Future Fusion, go for Trunade, bounce back to hand, activate Future Fusion, then activate Overload and win the game. It is a bit of a convoluted combo in my opinion. You need to have a lot of things go right for it to actually work out. And, given the Ancient Gear Drill does cost a card from hand, you do need to have a bit of a particular setup to actually get that OTK online. I think Drill is generally better used for just setting up things for later. Which makes me kind of confused as why this deck does not have things like Book of Moon, Enemy Controller, Shrink, things like that. Quickly spells that you can potentially use in case you want to use this card defensively instead of for the OTK. But, given that Future Fusion is limited to one copy, I do get why it's in here. And I'll sort of be giving my final verdict on this card and the Ancient Gear package at the end of the video once we've seen it actually in action in some games. Of course, the Ancient Gear monsters we're playing are Ancient Gear Soldier and Ancient Gear Cannon. These are two of the Ancient Gear monsters that, you can actually do normal summon without attributing, which is pretty nice. Ancient Gear Soldier is just a 1300 attack, 1300 defense point monster. Says if this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate spell or trap cards until the end of the damage step. So that's kind of a nice effect that can come up occasionally. I think Ancient Gear Cannon is generally the better Ancient Gear monster that you're going into with Drill. This is a monster with 500 attack, 500 defense. Says you contribute this card, inflict 500 damage to your opponent, and if you do, neither player can activate trap cards during the battle phase of this turn. So if you don't have access to Jinzo, let's say you didn't do the Future Fusion stuff before going for your Overload Fusion, but you still want to shut off your opponent's traps during the battle phase, Ancient Gear Cannon can be the card for you. So that's kind of nice. It also deals a little bit of burn damage, which can come up, but most of the time, if you're going for the OTK, you don't really need that extra 500. But I do like that this card just, shuts off traps during the battle phase. So that's kind of nice. For the other cards in the deck, we've got Dekoichi here just to draw deeper into the Future Fusion. It's also a machine for Overload Fusion, which is kind of nice. We've got a Magician of Faith here to recycle our spells. For instance, if we activate Future Fusion, they clear it before it can actually send to grave. We can potentially use a Faith to get that back. So that's kind of nice. We can also use it to get back things like Dimension Fusion or stuff like that. And for the spells, we've got the drills, as I mentioned. We get card destruction to dig deeper into the deck, which is very important because we're trying to get into that Future Fusion. It also sets up machines in grave for our Overload Fusion, so that's pretty good as well. We got the triple dimension fusion that I mentioned here. You pair it with Overload Fusion, and you basically win the game on the spot. We've got the double Trunade, as I mentioned, as well. We get Graceful Charity to dig deeper into the deck. We got a Heavy Storm to clear away our opponent's back row to sort of make the OTK more guaranteed. We've got a Magical Mallet here to reset our hand a little bit. It's kind of like card destruction. We're trying to dig deeper into the deck. Although I think this is a bit worse than card destruction because it doesn't set up machines in grave. But, it's still not a bad card for trying to dig for that Future Fusion. We got triple Nightmare Steel Cage to slow down the game while we're trying to assemble our combo. We don't really care about this thing being up because once Chimeratech hits the field, that pops our entire field. So that means that floodgates like Nightmare Steel Cage, Sword of Villain like Gravity Bind, etc. are going to be gone. Swords doesn't really impact us, but it is good to know about. Just any of these continuous spells or traps are going to be gone. And this is an important thing to note, where if you want to bring up Future Fusion for Chimeratech as like your game shot, it won't actually quite work out for you because Chimeratech Overdrive will hit the field, pop the Future Fusion, and then that will destroy it. So you mainly just want to use Future Fusion for Chimeratech to get materials engraved for the Overload Fusion. We got triple Overload Fusion here. We want to max it out on this card. We got Scapegoat here to stall out a little bit. This can be awkward if, we're trying to go for Chimeratech plays, but again, Chimeratech pops everything on the board. So, if we do bring out Chimeratech while we have 4 Scapegoat tokens, it doesn't really lock us out because then those tokens will be popped. We got Sword of Villain Light to stop our opponent's attacks. We got Gravity Bind to stop their attacks as well. We got a Mirror Force to deal with their aggressive pressure and a TT to pop their board. For the side deck, it's sort of a hodgepodge here. I don't exactly know why every single card is in here, but I do get some of them. Dekoichi's here. This is just more draw. I think, honestly, more Dekoichi in the main could be good just because it gets machines engraved. If they knock it, you've got material for Dimension Fusion, so that's kind of nice as well. I just like Dekoichi in general. Probably in my version, I'd play more of this. We got Double Wombat here for burn. We got Eprov for burn as well. We've got Pickaroo Circle of Enchantment for burn, and also Barrel Behind the Door for burn. We got a lot of burn tools here in case we are afraid of burn. And burn can be something that the deck can struggle with. You need 2,000 life points for the Dimension Fusion, but sometimes you don't even need the Dimension Fusion to win the game off Chimeratech. So, it's good to keep in mind, but these are cards here that can be good at stopping burn. We've got a Ring of Destruction to, deal with our opponent's monster, deal a bit of burn damage ourselves. And lastly, we got triple Threatening Roar and triple Boku here to, protect ourselves from battle-based OTKs. Potentially the mirror match even. Although in the mirror match, it's kind of awkward because then they're still left with a big Chimeratech Overdragon that we have to deal with. So maybe not the best thing in the world, but it can allow us to at least survive for another turn. But that's going to do it for the deck breakdown. Let's dive into some games and see how this deck actually plays. Okay, we got our first game here against the Worldo Dark Arm Dragon. Free guests on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. We're going to be diving in a second. If you like what you see here and want to see more Chimeratech format gameplay, definitely subscribe to the channel. We're going to be having a lot more of that lately. And also, we're trying to reach 1,600 by the end of August. So, by subscribing, you can help us reach that goal. But we open a pretty good opening hand. We're just going to set Dekoichi Pass because this draws the card, gets it deeper into our deck. But if they do mount an offensive pressure against us, we got Sidras, we got Jinzo to shut off their traps, we got Droroid to deal with defensive monsters as well. We got a lot of good stuff here. And as a note, the Cyber Dragons are in the dark artwork because, when I downloaded Paul Lynn's winning deck list, it did have the alt art for the Cyber Dragons. And I normally change them. I did change them for the deck profile and the second match we played. But I was so excited to try out this format that I just dove in right away. So, but they've got a Cyber Dragon alt art of their own, so they're going to bring that out, bring out a Warrior Lady as well, attack into our set monster. It's Dekoichi, so they are going to banish that indeed. We draw into another Cyber Dragon, so that's not terrible. And they're just going to pass back to us. We draw an Overload Fusion, which is kind of nice. Oh, as a note, actually, triple Cyber Dragon is kind of awkward because we draw Future Fusion. We can't go, Future Fusion, send Chimeratech materials because we need to have a Cyber Dragon in deck for that. But we can still send things like Gatling Dragon, so that's kind of nice. Our Overload Fusion can still be somewhat online. But yeah, we don't really have a good option to overload here. We could potentially just summon out 2 machines, like the Cyber Dragon and one other thing. Dimension Fusion to Chimeratech, then it's just 1600 attack. We could then go for Dimension Fusion after that, but it's not really worth doing in my opinion. So I'm just going to go for the Cyber Dragon into Jinzo here. And then I'm just going to attack in. I don't really think it's worth going Overload Fusion here, banish Jinzo, banish Cyber Dragon, and then Dimension Fusion back that board. Because we can save this for later. I don't think we're at risk of dying anytime soon, but you never know with this sort of deck. I guess a bigger fear would be if they can drop us down below 2,000. That's a bit awkward, but I still don't think we're at that point either, unless they've got a Chimeratech play of their own. But, I think we're ultimately pretty fine. They bring out the Creator Incarnate, so this reveals that they're on a bit of a Creator deck. I'm not really sure if that deck will be, that competitive in this format. But this first game is more to show how, wild this Chimeratech Overdragon deck can be if it manages to pop off. So I do think that this replay still has some value here. We're going to go for a Cyber Dragon here, and now I feel comfortable going for the Overload Fusion play with the Jinzo there. Because we can Dimension Fusion back that thing, stop their traps. Book of Moon is limited, I believe, in this format. So that means that, they won't be able to stop this via spell. And even if they do stop the Chimeratech Dragon, we're still in a good spot here. So this will come out with 3,200 attack points here. We're going to go for Dimension Fusion, bringing back our Jinzo, our Cyber Dragon, and Drillroid, as well as the other Cyber Dragon. So they brought back the Warrior Lady in defense, which I think makes sense if they had brought it back. Well, actually, so I was going to say if they brought it back and attack, we'd attack him with Overdragon, but now we can just attack him with Drillroid. But I think it is actually better to just attack in with the Chimeratech, because if they do have a way to stop some of what we're doing here, then I don't want them to have BrainCon or something that can take control of Overdragon on the crackback and just kill us through that. So I actually am fine banishing the Overdragon here, getting that out of there, and then attacking in for, this is lethal damage anyways, but this would just be like if they had Scapegoat or something, they would survive another turn, and, they could potentially have something on the crackback, but I feel like that was pretty good there, and we were able to just win that game very, very handily, just through the powerful, Overload Fusion plus Dimension Fusion combo there. But, oh my goodness, so this hand is going to be pretty good here. We draw Future Fusion, and that's always a good start. So, we have a couple options here. What I'm going to do ultimately is I'm going to bring out this Drillroid here, set the Gravity Bind and the Future Fusion, because I believe, since Drillroid says before damage calculation, not at the start of the damage step, I believe that flip monsters will still get their effects under Drillroid. I could be wrong about that, but I think that is how it happens. So I don't want them to have Morphing Jar or something here. And I figure if they've got MST or Dust Tornado or something like that, they're going to activate it on the Future Fusion anyways. So I feel like I'm fine just setting these 2 cards here that I want to keep around in case they do have Morphing Jar. But they do have Dust Tornado indeed. And they are going to hit the Gravity Bind. And I think that is a bit of a misplay on my opponent's part. I generally don't like to talk about opponents' misplays in these videos because I'm more focused on my own play. But I think it is important to point this out because I do think that if they had saved the Dust Tornado for a Future Fusion play, then we would not have been able to do what we do in this game, right? Because what we do in this game is pretty disgusting. You know, we reveal the Chimeratech Overdragon here, send every machine monster left in our deck to the graveyard, which is a lot of them. It is, I recorded in chat afterwards, 12 monsters here that we're sending for the Chimeratech, and we do this because we want to deck them down to make it more likely we draw Overload Fusion and just blow out our opponent that way. So, you know, I figure it's good to just send everything. We do still have these machine monsters in hand in case we need to wall up a bit. We've got swords as well, in case we need to wall up a little bit too. So, you know, we do have options in hand, but I think it's fine just to send all the machines to grave. And this is like, you don't want to be in this position. If your opponent if you're the opponent, that is, if your opponent sends everything from deck to grave with Future Fusion, you're in a really bad spot because they've got so many ways to just win the game on the spot from that point, which is why when you're bringing in things like Death Tornado and things like that to stop Future Fusion, you really do want to save them for the Future Fusion. You know, sure, if you were attacking in next turn and like I flip Gravity Bind and you want to clear the Drillroid, you can use Death Tornado on the Gravity Bind or something, right? But I think in general, you know, you do want to save it for Future Fusion because Future Fusion is just an instant win con there. And if our opponent had done that, then we would have been in a much different spot this game. We would have had Gravity Bind, so we would have been able to stall out a bit, and we might have still been able to win the game here. But I think overall, you know, we would have been in a worse spot because they do have the Creator here, so they can actually go into things like, you know, Reaper. If they want to bring back that Reaper, they can do that. They choose not to bring back the Reaper, instead prioritizing damage, which I think is also fine because you want to just kill me as fast as possible at this point, because I do have so many machines in grave. So I think at this point, that is the good thing to do here. But, you know, I feel like they would have been in a much better spot if they just saved us for the Future Fusion here, because we do draw Overload Fusion, and, you know, we're just going to use the Ancient Gear Cannon, deal 5, and also get another machine in grave, and then we're just going to bring out a Chimeratech Dragon that has 13 materials, I think? Yeah, 13 materials. Or no, actually 14 materials. Yeah, 14 materials. So this is 14 times 8, which is 11,200, and yeah, we could even just kill them. I mean, any of these attack actually kills them here. So yeah, we're just going to attack into everything and deal a ton of damage. Someone can calculate out the exact amount of damage we do this turn in the comments there, but that is just more than enough to kill, and that's going to be the end of the game. So, you know, this shows, like, when you do draw the nuts, like, it is crazy, right? But again, you know, there are ways to stop that. If our opponent had Fire Dust on the Future Fusion, then this would have been a much different game here. And so I don't think this deck is quite as robust as something like Stein OTK decks are. And to see why I think that, let's dive into the next game that I got to show for y'all. Okay, we got a game against Aratos here, a frequent guest on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. And we're going to dive into the game. This will be against more of a meta deck. Not to say the Creator could never be meta in this format, but I do think it's more of a rogue strategy here compared to the deck that our opponent's going to be playing. We have bricked a little bit, so we're just going to set this Ancient Gear Drill, go for a card destruction here, because I'm figuring, you know, if I draw an Ancient Gear monster, I can get out a spell from deck, and that's pretty good. So I do think setting is fine, and unfortunately we don't really draw too well here. We see our opponents probably on Monarchs. You know, they got Whale, they got Frog. Frog's now in grave, so they're able to bring out a Monarch next turn, so that's a bit awkward for us. But we choose to set a Drillroid, activated swords, pass back to them. What we want to do next turn is be able to summon out a Blowback Dragon and pop their stuff. If they bring out Zaborg to pop our monster, that's bad, but they haven't popped these swords, so that means that we're protecting ourselves a little bit. And if they do have Mobius, then that's really bad for us, but nothing we can do if they've got Mobius anyways. So, yeah, they're going to bring back the Frog here, and they are going to activate a Comfy and rip away the Blowback. That is the correct move, because Spell Cancel was really bad for us when we got a Sword of Dealing Light Up. And that's sort of one of the things that I take issue with Spell Canceller. It's just kind of awkward here. But our opponent's going to go for a Future Fusion of their own, reveal a Cyber Twin Dragon, and send 2 Cyber Dragons from deck to grave. So even though this is Monarchs, Monarchs can play Future Fusion as well. And it's actually a really cool tech, you know, just basically Foolish Burial for Cyber Dragons that also potentially brings out a threat in a couple turns. So I think that's really cool. Our opponent's going to set 2, pass back to us. We draw into a Decoichi here. We're just going to flip the Drillroid, set the Decoichi, because again, if it's like Morphing Jar, we don't want to trigger that. But they've got Mirror Force for that, and that's a bit unfortunate for us. So we won't be able to pop their defense position monster. They're going to flip up a Spy here, and they're going to bring out another Spy. And now they're going to tribute off that Treeborn for a Mobius, pop 2, and that's really bad for us. Because, I mean, we do get a draw off this Decoichi, so that's not nothing. But blowback is not going to do it because that is a tribute monster and we don't have any fodder for that. So it's going to be a bit awkward for us. They're going to set one pass back to us. Ancient Gear Cannon is not going to do it. Maybe if we still had that drill, it would do something, but we don't really have any reactive spells in our deck, like no quick play spells or anything like that. So that wouldn't really even do anything here, but we're just going to set that. But they bring out a Cyber Twin here because the second turn after Future Fusion was activated, and they're just able to get in for well over lethal damage. So, this sort of shows how the deck can definitely have its flaws, right? It can definitely brick because you are playing a bunch of high level monsters, and it makes sense why you're playing those for the Dimension Fusion, Overload Fusion, etc. plays, but it is a bit bad. So for side decking, I actually, because they're on Monarchs and stuff, I take out some of the spell and trap removal. I take out things like True Nades. I take out things like Heavy Storm. And I believe I forget because I fit in 6 cards here. I fit in Ring. I fit in, I think, Triple Roar. Actually, 7 cards then. Ring, Triple Roar, Triple Waboku. Yeah, I forget exactly what I take out there. But I figure it's good to have the Roars and the Wabokus just because, like, if they're going for a big push with Monarchs, then it's good to have. And also this protects my tribute fodders, so that's kind of nice as well. I go for Roar here because I want to, protect the Dekoichi, so that way I can treat it out for Jinzo next turn. So I could have potentially saved it just to be a bit more, conservative with my traps, but I think it's fine. I've got Ring, and also I'm getting a draw off to Koichi, so that's pretty good. They go for Dust Shoot, though, and they're able to send back a monster from deck to hand. They're going to send, or from hand to deck, that is. They're going to send the Dekoichi there, shuffle that back in. We flip up another Dekoichi, so now we have an unknown card here, and oh my goodness, that is the best thing it could have been. I mean, that is just insane. We're going to tribute that Dekoichi for a Jinzo. This plays around things if they've got, like, Dust Tornado or things like that. So we're going to send every machine left in our deck from the deck to the grave. And that's a lot of them. We're going to go for an Overload Fusion now. Banish the Jinzo as well as everything else. There's no point in keeping the Jinzo around right now because the Chimeratech will pop it anyways. So I figure it's better just to banish it. If they've got something on the summon of Chimeratech, like TT or something like that, we've got Dimension Fusion to bring back enough to probably be fine here anyways. So that's a 12,000 attack point. Chimeratech here. We go for Dimension Fusion, bring back a Jinzo, a Drillroid, a Barrel Dragon, and a Blowback Dragon. Now, I could have potentially brought back another Blowback Dragon instead of this Drillroid, but I wanted the guaranteed destruction of their set with the Drillroid rather than the potential destruction with Blowback. I do think in hindsight this was an error because, as I mentioned, I think Drillroid still allows for the flip effects to go through. So realistically, like, we want Blowback here to potentially get the pop in, but if it's anything except for Reaper, then, we'll be able to attack in over it and win anyways, right? So I think that the Drillroid here was a mistake, but I think it's fine in hindsight. It doesn't really change much here. I think we're still winning the game, like, every single time out of 10. So we go for Battle Dragon here, and we're trying to pop the Cyber Dragon, and the reason for this, well, actually, I think this was a mistake on my part because I could have, let's see, 500, 2,900, 5,200, 68. So that's 6,800 from that. And this is, let's see, 47. Okay, no, it was correct to do this because I ultimately deal more damage by popping the Sidra and getting in over the set with Drillroid and then attacking him with my 3 other monsters here than I do by popping the set monster and getting over the Sidra and attacking him with everything. So, so I do actually deal more damage this way, so this is correct to do. And I'm going to pop the Sidra, and then I'm going to attack in with the Drillroid into the set there. And it is a Treeborn Frog. So, kind of unfortunate that, wasn't like a Reaper or anything to get super high value off the Drillroid, but I think it's fine. And we could set the Ring here. I don't really feel the need to while Jinzo is on field. We can't activate it. I want Ring as a win con after they clear our board if they're somehow able to do that. I think it's very unlikely they can clear our board, but just in case, I'll keep the Ring in hand. And our opponent didn't have anything there, so we're going to win the game. So, again, the deck can just win out of nowhere, right? With the Future Fusion plus Dim Fuse plus Overload Fusion, etc. It can definitely win the game just on the spot. But again, as game 1 shows, it can definitely be a bit flawed if you brick. And other decks can definitely punish that quite a bit. So we have a pretty good opening hand here. They're going to go for Dust Shoot, which does diminish the quality of the hand a little bit here. But we're going to go for Charity now. Draw 3. We're going to pitch an Ancient Gear Cannon and an Ancient Gear Soldier because I figure it's good to have those in grave for Overload Fusion stuff. I mean, we could have kept one in hand in case we draw Drill. We can go, like, summon it out, activate Drill, True Nade back stuff, and do things with that. I think it's ultimately fine. We're going to set a Dekoichi here along with a Scapegoat and a Wuboku here and pass back to our opponent there. They're going to flip up the Tomato, and they're going to attack in to the Dekoichi there. We're going to draw a card. We draw into the Drill, so, we get punished for sending both those Ancient Gear monsters there. But I think we've got enough to, like, stall out a bit to potentially draw into, like, Overload Fusion or Future Fusion or something like that. We've got Scapegoat, we got Wuboku. It's a bit tough for our opponent to deal with. And then we have True Nade and Heavy in case we need to go for a big OTK push. So I'm feeling pretty good about this overall until they tribute that Tomato for a Vanity's Fiend. And, I mean, this deck has very, very little ways to deal with Vanity's Fiend. I think the only one really is actually, I mean, we could stall and then Tribute 7 out Blowback. So if we do that, then we're in an okay spot. But the only other one is like Ring of Destruction, which we do have in the deck because we did side that in. But it's not good. And the Scapegoat is just rotting on our field because we can't use it. We're going to take the 3600. I feel like we want to save Wuboku for when they make a super big push. It is kind of awkward because we are getting pretty low in 4-Dimension Fusion. We kind of need a higher life total, but we draw swords, so that can stall out a little bit here. And so I'm feeling okay there. They do go for MST, though, on the sword, so that's a bit awkward. They attack in for 36 here, and I do fire Wuboku because I'm afraid that they have a ring of their own. So if they have a ring of their own, they can just ring the Spy after attacking in here, and that's really bad for us. So we will just fire Wuboku here. They set one, pass back to us. We draw a Jinzo, which will not quite do it here. We just set the True Nade as a bluff and pass back to them. They're going to flip up this Faith here, grab back that MST, and they're going to pop the new set. It's True Nade. And this isn't lethal. This is 500 off lethal. So we are still in it, technically. But it's really not good for us here. So we're going to take a ton of damage, dropping down to 500. And they're going to pass back to us. We draw Ancient Gear Soldier, so we can finally use the Drill. We're going to bring that out and try attacking into the Spy. They try and use Book. They can't actually use Book once this is declared an attack. So I mentioned that, and they're going to choose to use this before we actually declare an attack, which is, I think, the right thing for them to do. So yeah, they're going to decide to just use it for attack deck, flipping down the Faith. I think that makes sense because Faith gets back a spell from grave, and they're feeling pretty good about that. But we can still attack over the Spy, which I will do, just dealing 100. And, we activate Drill, hoping against hope that I forgot, that there actually was a Book of Moon in the deck, but there is not a Book of Moon in the deck. We're just going to set the Future Fusion just because, but we can't even activate Future Fusion while Vanity Fiends is up. So, yeah, this is going to be really bad for us. They flip up a Magician Faith here, grab an MST just in case our new set is anything. They go for Brain Con on the Ancient Gear Soldier here, and that's just going to be the end of the game. So, yeah, I think this deck definitely needs some work. I definitely see why it was able to win an event. If you do pop off with it, you just win the game on the spot, which is very nice. But I do think this deck is a lot more fragile than these Silent Decay decks running around. I think it's a bit more gimmicky as well. Like the Ancient Gear Drill stuff is like nice in theory, but I think in practice you have to play bricks like Ancient Gear Soldier, which are not really that good. Ancient Gear Cannon is like okay. It does stop traps in the battle phase, which is kind of neat. But I think overall it's not really worth playing the Drill package because it just feels like a major brick. And you want this deck to be as consistent as possible. I would probably play more like Cyber Phoenixes and Dekoichis and things like that actually like draw you cards. Cyber Phoenix protect things as well. I think that there are better machines to be playing here instead. I'm also not completely sold on the like Gatling Dragon package. Like blowbacks are very nice. I'm not really sure if Barrel should be in the deck, but maybe as a one of just to send off Future Fusion could be good. I don't quite know my feelings on that. I just know that I would say to cut the Drill package. That would be my main impression from these games. But also, I do like this OTK being in the format a bit more than I like Steiner DK being in the format, because I do think this does have more flaws than Steiner DK. Namely, you kind of got to go all in on this style of deck, right? You can potentially play things that are a bit better than Ancient Gear Drill, but you are still going all in on machines, like committing to that line of strategy, right? The problem with Steiner DK, with pretty much any deck could play Steiner DK in it, right? You just fit in one Cyber-Stein, one Last Will, and you just hope that you manage to pull it off over the course of the game, and that would often happen and just result in non-games. While this deck can also result in some non-games, I think it's a bit less consistent, and also it has the benefit of being its own unique thing, which does make its presence in the format a bit more palatable in my opinion. But what do you think about this deck? Do you think that it ruins the format? Do you think that it's just too strong? Or does results in too many non-games to make this format fun? Or do you think that this deck is maybe a bit overhyped and not as scary as people make it out to be. Let me know down in the comments below. Also, let me know how you would change this deck. Would you keep in the drill package, but potentially put in things like Shrink, Book of Moon, Econ, things like that? Or would you add the gadgets potentially? I will be covering gadget decks on their own later in the coverage of this format. But it is something you could potentially put in this deck. They're all machines, so, they go with that element of the deck. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of it. And, of course, as always, I got to shout out my patrons. So big shout outs to Rinswin, Pork Trapcoon, Bren Donker, GMYFS, Dumbstrike, and Tyler Comp. That means a lot that you all support me this way and can make more videos like this in the future. Also, if you want to play games in the Chimeratech format or any other format that I feature on the channel, head on over to the YGF from Zero Discord server. It's a great time. I hope that you enjoyed as always. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGF from Zero, and I'm signing off.